Great. So at the meeting today, we will talk about the background of MID, provide an overview of the request for proposals, share with you the grant application and capacity building consulting, rating criteria of the RFP, Zoom grants, timeline of this whole process, and then provide any answers to your questions. And as Andrea mentioned, it will be recorded. We will share the recording as well as the PowerPoint in Zoom grants so that you can have access after this meeting. So I will invite Robin Foreman to go over the background of MID.
Hi, thanks, Nikki, or hi again, I should say. So just a little bit of background about MID in case maybe many of you might be new to MID. So MID refers to our 1.1 of 1% sales tax, behavioral health sales tax fund. MID actually stands for mental illness and drug dependency. We try not to use that language very much because it's a little bit old school, and we're hoping to update the language as we move into a new planning phase in 2026, a new phase of MID, which will be called MID 3. We have an annual budget of approximately 65 million, but I will say that that varies and has been going up over the past several years, so it can be more like 75 million that is generated by all of us in our community through sales tax revenue. We cover 5 strategy areas. So MID has about 51 different initiatives. This is one of many initiatives, the community-driven behavioral health grants, and most of them are not really grant funding opportunities, but very much more just kind of ongoing system support initiatives, but they fall into prevention and early intervention, crisis diversion, recovery, reentry, system improvements, and therapeutic courts. There's a lot more information on our website and through our annual report if you're more interested in specific initiatives that we fund. Our policy goals are that really guide MID programming include those read here or listed here. I'm not going to read all of them to you, but as Nikki said, she'd pass out make the slide deck available to you. But specifically, this initiative is really trying to address the increase in culturally appropriate and trauma-informed behavioral health services in King County.
Great, thank you, Robin.
No problem.
Yeah, so the community behavioral health grant recognizes that the need for culturally responsive services. We acknowledge that communities are in the best position to identify and respond to needs. So we seek to increase awareness about behavioral health, build communities of support, promote life and wellness, build capacity, and integrate learning into system level planning. So that is the purpose of this particular funding. This IRP, particular IRP for this round for 23 and 24, seek to fund small organizations to provide community-driven behavioral health services that support the behavioral health needs within their own communities in King County, and organizations who propose programming that is different from the traditional white European models would be prioritized for funding. So what we mean by this is successful applications will support the development, strengthening, and our implementation of creative, innovative, culturally and linguistically responsive approaches for the community. The applications must meet the definition of small organization to be considered for funding, and we will define that definition in a later slide. So there are 2 options of funding under this IRP. You can apply for one or the other and not both. So I will go over both of the options. This is option A, and it's the community-driven grants funding. Under this option, organization can propose the community-driven, creative, innovative, culturally, and linguistically responsive approaches I mentioned earlier. Examples of those projects are listed on the screen. I'm not going to read them all, but some of them, you know, can include to build capacity within your community, to provide culturally and linguistically appropriate behavioral health education outreach awareness campaigns, strengthen partnerships with other organizations to provide behavioral health supports, provide the actual culturally and linguistically behavioral health services, support information and referral, provide trauma-specific, trauma-informed services, expansion of services that are not covered by other funding sources, or provide culturally appropriate care guideline assessment materials or tools to support behavioral health services. Or you can apply for option B. It's the art therapy behavioral health pilot. So under this total funding, $200,000 will be awarded to one single agency to support this project with a focus to work closely with ethnically and culturally diverse community. The goal of this project is to explore whether an art therapy approach can help to improve cognitive functioning, reduce and resolve conflicts and distress, and or support recovery. So the awarded organization may be a behavioral health provider. You may partner with a behavioral health provider to provide this, or you might be a contracted therapist that can contract with an agency to provide this. And we will consider partnership with an existing art institute to provide or implement this project if that is the direction that you want to go. Ultimately, we want the project to focus on supporting the health and wellness and you know, the mental and health and wellness of the community.
There's one question, Nikki.
Yeah, go ahead.
Regarding strengthening partnerships, can this include offering financial support in the form of pass-through funding? And I believe that's for option A.
That's a great question. Are you saying that you want to be a fiscal sponsor for another agency to provide this program? Am I understanding your question correctly?
We have had initiatives where we've done mini grants with community partners in the past, and just wondering if that kind of being able to provide funding for building those partnerships, if that would be possible as part of this. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's something we can consider. Robin has more experience with this funding in the past than me. Has that came up before, Robin, or is that something we can consider for this particular funding?
It hasn't come up before. I do think, depending on what the model looks like, potentially, ultimately, we are trying to build capacity within communities on their own and not necessarily, but you know, not necessarily a gatekeeper role. So I'm not saying that that's what you're trying to be. But if there are opportunities for instance, for some of those partners to actually apply directly to this, that would be preferable. But if not, depending on what the applications are, yeah, that could, in the model that you're trying to achieve could be compelling. Sure. And then I saw that there's another question from Laura about rural populations. I do think that we do have a specific rural initiative, SIO2, that is about a similar chunk of change for specific to rural populations. In that there is overlap too for a community, cultural and linguistic communities in rural areas. So I think there is the possibility of overlap into this initiative as well. But there will need to be kind of a defined definition about why, what are the cultural kind of specifications in rural communities that would make this funding relevant, and particularly would be more competitive if you were actually working in or with a community marginalized or culturally diverse group within that rural community, if that makes sense. Does that make sense, Laura?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Robin. Any other questions before we move on?
There's one more question or two more. How open are you to capacity building? For example, to supporting staff, salaries, and overhead for a very small org that is already providing culturally sensitive mental health education, but that is not yet sustainably funded?
I think one of the goals of this funding is to support the capacity of the agency. Although we are looking to see if you would be doing an expansion on top of what you are doing right now. So there is a question in the narrative questions asking if it's an expansion of your services and how is that different than what you are doing right now. So we are looking to fund an expansion of your services, but definitely focusing a lot on supporting your capacity to do that successfully.
Next question, do you need to choose option A or B, or can we apply for both for two different projects?
That's a great question. I think
I would say you could apply for both, but you won't. Well, except Nikki, I thought we went back and forth on this and that we were suggesting that people just apply for one.
well, I think if the two
Which
projects are
projects?
totally different from each other,
Yeah, right.
then
Okay.
you can potentially apply for both, but you
Yeah.
will only be awarded one pot of money if you will be selected.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer.
Thank you.
One more question, can two BIPOC-led nonprofits who fit your definition of a small organization partner on an application together, even though together they would no longer be considered small?
That's a tough question. I think that should be okay, right, Robin? I mean, as long as one of them is small, I mean, each of them is small on their own.
Yeah, I would think that would be okay. To
But-
do small
yeah.
groups working together.
But just define it very clearly in your application and talk about, you know, the two different organizations and why you are partnering with each other, and really emphasize that each of you stand alone or meet the definition of a small organization. I think that should be okay.
And then one more question popped up. Can any of this funding purchase or rent a building or space for programming?
Yes. So on the budget template, there is a line for operating costs, and rental assistant could fall under operating costs, part of operating costs. Or rental, I mean, not rental assistant, but rental for the space could fall under operating costs. Anything else before we move on?
In case of partnering on an application, one would have to assume the fiduciary role, correct?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
In case of a partnering on one application, just one org would have to assume the fiduciary role. Is that correct? I would say yes, because
Yes.
one organization would need to be designated as the lead in the RFP and with our contracting, so.
Right. I would add that just make it very clear that one is not overpowering the other. So it should be an equitable partnership, and you know, you should take into consideration both partners being participated equally in this project and getting equitable funding for each of them. Great. So moving on. So the desired outcomes for this RFP is on the screen. The desired outcome for this RFP include we are hoping for it to for increased access to and utilization of services, improve knowledge and awareness of behavioral services and resources, reduce stigma, and improve policies and systems. This particular IFP. So as part of this procurement, the MIT team will launch a new collaborative approach to better support and connect with small organizations working to serve the behavioral health needs within the communities. The awarded organization for this funding will be encouraged to participate in meetings of this collaborative through the duration of the funding. We are thinking of hosting meetings quarterly. If you don't receive the funding, but would like to participate, you will have the opportunity to participate with a stipend. So we are still thinking about the details of this. And once everything has been finalized and out, then we can share more about information about this collaborative to let you know if you would like to participate. The goals of this include some of the bullet points on the screen, although it will ultimately be determined by the collaborative at the initial convening. So the goals of this collaborative after we award the funding is to help build organizational and behavioral health capacity among small BIPOC LGBTQI communities, foster a community of learning and mutual education, a partner with the mainstream behavioral health system to really address the unmet needs, to build and strengthen partnership to amplify the voices of this small community-owned behavioral providers, and most importantly, to hear from you all and to provide recommendations to the MIT team and the MIT advisory committee how to support equitable policy development and funding recommendations in the future. So in order to be eligible for this IFP, you must meet the following criteria. So you need to be a nonprofit community-based or grassroots coalitions or tribal agencies who provide culturally and linguistically responsive behavioral services. You must meet the definition of a small organization, and small organizations are being defined as entities with fewer than 20 FTE, so full-time employee staff positions, and having less than $4 million in operating budget in the prior fiscal year. So that's clearly defined here as well as in the IRP. The entity must demonstrate commitment to ESG, as this is a community-driven IRP, and demonstrate ability to provide services to communities who identify as low income, BIPOC, LGBTQI+, or communities who hold entities, who hold identities from other marginalized groups. Any other questions?
There's one question in the chat. What kind of history of community programming offerings services are you ideally looking for from the small organization? How can we best show that in or around the application?
That's a huge question. Robin, any input from you?
Sure. I think really, I think some of the most important things are why, what was why was behavioral health or some sort of behavioral health intervention identified as an important component of programming in communities, and then and how was that developed? And then if you're not currently providing behavioral health services, how I think it would just be important to understand how the organization will be understanding what it means to provide like a behavioral health intervention that may be not non-mainstream, but is addressing behavioral health issues in the community, and just having some credibility around, and like being able to create a credible argument as to why the organization is well positioned to do that. If that answers your question, Emily.
Yeah, so I think we have very clear and detailed questions on the narrative questions. You can refer to that to see what we are looking for. And then in the RFP itself, we have the rating criteria. Just make sure that you adhere to those rating criteria that we're looking for, as well as meeting the minimum eligibility criteria that we mentioned here. I think we went, okay, so we're gonna go over prioritization right here. So it might help you to, understand a little bit more what we're looking for. Organizations will be prioritized, but not be excluded. We will not be excluded if you currently have MID funding, but we will prioritize applications that are not currently receiving MID funding. We will prioritize applications that design programs that we mentioned repeatedly already that are different from traditional inherited European models based on oppression and othering. So more innovative, more creative, more community-based, or community-focused and driven for those diverse and marginalized communities. We will look at applications that articulate clearly the community identify behavioral health needs within the community to be served. And demonstrate strongly how you will be able to respond to those needs of those communities. And we will be looking at applications that are working to build behavioral health capacity within the communities to be served. So those are some of the main things that are important things that we will be looking at when considering your application. So this RFP has a total of $1,752,000. Organizations can apply up to $200,000 per project in total funding for the 2-year. 200,000 of this, as I mentioned earlier, will be awarded to a single agency to support the art therapy behavioral health pilot project. The anticipated funding period will be from April 1st to December 31st. Although sometimes that things can shift a little bit. But right now, that's the timeline that we are aiming at. When you apply, you are expected to include a 21-month budget covering your goals, activities, and outcomes. And we provided a budget template in Zoom Grants. You can download that and look through the instructions that we provided, the template that we created for you. And there's a tab that you can provide the narrative. So don't forget to do that. And you can re-upload the budget into Zoom Grants with your application.
A couple of questions just popped up.
Okay.
If our project is significantly less than 200,000, would that still be considered competitive?
Absolutely. Yeah, we can say up to, but it's not. It doesn't have to be $200,000. When you propose your program, just make sure it aligns with the budget and that it looks sustainable, aligned with what you propose to do.
If you currently do not have MID funding for this year, but plan to apply for MID rural funding for the following year, will that impact your ability to get MID rural health funding for 2024?
It's a great question for Robin. Do you have an answer, Robin?
So I'm trying to, if you currently do not have MID funding for this year, but plan to apply for the MID rural funding for the following year, does that mean that if you got this funding this year for this grant, and then you wanted to apply for the rural grant, would you be able to? And yeah, I mean, we have funded an organization historically for community-driven grants and for the rural grant. So yes, that would not preclude you from being funded for the rural grant. But it would need to be a very different body of work. We would not likely fund you for the same thing.
Thanks, Robin.
And how many awards do you intend to give?
Well, based on the available funding that we have, we intend to fund up to about 8. So it just depends on how many applicants apply, right? If we have organization apply for only $100,000, then we will be able to fund more. But if all the organization apply up to the amount, then we can only fund about 8 applications. And then the remaining balance, we are thinking about using that to provide a stipend for the learning collaborative. So that's the plan right now, but it really depends on how many applications we get and how much people are applying for.
I would just add, I'm not sure that this would ever happen again, but last year we ended up funding more than we anticipated later in the year because there was a significant amount of underspend in the mid budget. And so we were able to fund 14 agencies eventually rather than the initial 7. But it will depend, we have this amount of money. And if there's a couple small grants that get funded, for instance, and just like Nikki said, we might be able to fund more.
Would the approximately 8 include the art therapy pilot project?
Yes, it does. Any other ones? Any other questions?
That is it for now.
Great, thank you. All right, moving on. So we provide free application support at no cost to support you with your application. It's the consultants are available in multiple languages. So if you need help in a particular language, we might have them available to support you. They can assist in determining if your proposal fits with the IRP. They can provide guidance on how best to answer questions. They can support the review of your proposal. They can provide editing and budget review. So those are some of the few things that they can do to support your application. And once you are funded, awarded applications can apply for capacity building consulting. And again, it is being offered no cost to applicants. But this part is after you have been awarded funding. The other part is prior. So the capacity building consultants can provide support in the following areas, which is listed on the screen. I will not read it off, but they are super helpful. And we really focus on supporting building the capacity of those organizations. And I have seen this really being able to support those organizations so that they have capacity to do the work effectively. So for both of the grant application and capacity building, we prioritize small organizations that meet the definitions, but essentially everyone could qualify. So if you are interested, you should contact the technical assistant consultants directly. They are listed on the RP document itself. So if you go into Zoom Grants, click on the RP attachment and scroll to the bottom, you will find information about this tool funding as well as a list of consultants that you can reach out to directly for assistance. Any questions before we move on?
There's one question regarding the budget.
Okay.
Is the 200,000 for 21 months? In the RFP, I see awards are anticipated for us to 100,000 per year, which would be not quite 200,000 for the 21 months.
So initially, I think initially when we put the budget template together, we were thinking it's, we're going to divide for the 2 years. And we can make that adjustment, but you can divide the total amount for the 21 month. Is that correct, Robin? Or do they have to spend 100,000 in the first year and then 100,000 on the following year?
There is flexibility because it's in between the biennial budget, so there is a way to, if there's funds not spent, and you'll be able to carry it over to the 2024. So I just what Nikki was saying too, dividing. amount of money into the 21 months. Yeah, April, right? To kind of make your plan happen. Yeah, if that's clear. So so yes, we have a little bit of a late start because we had another RFP to get out. So yes, we still want to make sure that the 200,000 is available in the shorter amount of time.
So does that mean they can only budget for 9 months of how much they need, and then they can budget for the rest in 2024?
Well, so apply for 200,000 total for 21 months. Yes, that would be the answer. And I think how you decide to do that, we can work with you on.
Great, thank you. Does that answer your question? And we will go back and, fine tune some of these responses. We will have them written down and post them in Zoom grants. So you can go back and take a look if we make any adjustment to our responses. So moving on, so we will be rating applications on a 100-point scale. Questions include organization capacity and experience, program model, equity and social justice, budget and fiscal, and data collection. You can find these questions under narrative questions in Zoom grants, and the rating criteria in section 9A in the IRP. So you can look at both of those spaces for more detail on what we will be looking and rating your application on. In some cases, we might need to move forward with an interview, but the regular process is that if we will determine based on discussion with the review panels, and if we need additional information or if we need to move forward, then we can conduct interviews with the top applicants. Sorry, I make a typo over there. So your proposals must be submitted by 2 p.m. On February 22nd via Zoom grants. Your completed package should include the responses to the summary questions. They are under the summary questions tab in Zoom grants. They should include responses to the narrative questions under the narrative questions tab in Zoom grants. And you need to complete the budget as well as the narrative requirements and upload that up to Zoom grants. So those are the 3 documents that we'll be looking at. If you are missing one document, it might be considered incomplete and might be eliminated from the review. If you experience technical difficulties with Zoom grants while you're putting the application together, you can contact the help desk in Zoom grants or reach out to the procurement lead. So if you can send an email to the contact in Zoom grants, Andrea and our team will look at those questions and or will provide support to you as appropriate. So we strongly encourage you to apply early, so that you don't run into difficult technical difficulty toward the end, which might result in late submission and might result in rejection of your proposal. You might email the proposal directly to us, so you can email directly to the IRP lead, which is Andrea. There's an email in the IRP that you can email, but they must be before 2 p.m. on the due date. If you send it to us after 2 p.m., it will not be accepted. We prefer for you to submit it via Zoom grants, but if you run into a lot of difficulties that you cannot be resolved, then you can email the application to us. Okay. And again, all the IRP materials are posted on Zoom grants under the library tab. Please check that tab regularly for updates. We will upload the recording today, the PowerPoint, all the questions and answers that you asked today, as well as questions that we receive until the deadline of the questions. So we will compile those and provide responses and upload to the library tab in Zoom Grants. Again, all application must be filled out and submitted via Zoom Grants. We will make exception via email if you run into a lot of difficulty and are not able to resolve that. You have until, I'm gonna go over the timeline in a bit, but questions that you submitted to us today will be uploaded to Zoom Grants in the next few days. And the questions that are coming, throughout the process, we will compile and post them up. And the last day we will provide responses will be February 20th by the end of the day. And here is the link to the IRP if you don't have access to that already in Zoom Grants. So here's the timeline. The IRP was released on the 10th of January. So it's currently open and running in Zoom Grants right now. The applicants conference is today. You have until February 8th to reach out to the grant capacity consultants for help with your application. That is 2 weeks before the deadline. The final questions are due 1 week before the deadline, which is on the 15th of February by 2 p.m. And we will have until February 20th, end of the day, to provide final responses for all the questions. The applications will be due on the 22nd of February at 2 p.m. Again, you will need to submit all the responses via Zoom Grants and can send to us if absolutely necessary. The review panels will be reviewing your applications from February 23rd to March 8th. We will be meeting with the decision team after that to propose our recommendations and to get the final approval. We will notify awarded organizations by late April, and the anticipated award date will be April 1st. So that's the timeline for now, but things could change a little bit, as you all know. So I'm just going to let you know that it might shift a little bit, but that's the timeline we have right now for this process.
I just want to say if the timeline does shift, we will always put an amendment on Zoom Grants with the new timeline, and also blast out an email to anybody that has already started an award or an application in Zoom Grants. So if you do want to get notifications about that, start an application sooner rather than later. And that email on that screen is wrong. Please use the email that's in the chat for communication with me.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
Okay, that's all we have for this applicants conference. Any other questions? Any questions that you want to ask us? But welcome to unmute yourself and ask questions if you would like to. I'll put in the
Someone's
chat.
asking for you to go back to the link a few slides back.
And I'll also put it in the chat.
Thank you, Andrea. And if you can't think of any questions right now, you can always email us the questions via Zoom Grants, and we will post your responses up back on there. Great. It sounds like we don't have any other questions, Andrea. Is that correct?
Not at this time.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being with us today and for joining us on this very gloomy afternoon. I hope you have a good rest of your day, and please let us know if you have any questions. Thank you.
Well,